So I'm going to try to say this in the length of time that it takes to boil some water for some porridge. Um, uh, I saw an article yesterday on WinFM about mental health, young men in particular, who are being hospitalized and who are also being in the process of the necessity for hospitalization. They find themselves in other not so um, happy circumstances because of the lack of facilities and so forth. But the whole thing is this is really all one thing, one idea, and I think I'm already doing poorly in my uh, attempt to beat the boiling water. But there's a thought that has been moving about in my head, and it's coalescing with a number of other thoughts. That thought is, whew, place is hot. That thought is that responsibility, and its relationship to rights. I've questioned that before. I've questioned it in the context of this saddling of the two and the conditionality then of rights, which means, in my interpretation, that, well, I mean, it's pretty clearly conditional, right? If you have rights and you can only take or assume or even assert those rights, if you're going to also adopt the responsibility that goes with rights, as is the ideology. But the whole idea is foul to me, or at least it reeks of cause for question. And I've done some of that before, but I've been trying to figure out what might more properly be any relationship of those two, or perhaps something else. It too isn't necessarily something that I'm going to subscribe to, but it's just trying to find clarity where I see that there's an aim at a particular there's an observation, but there seems to be some sort of obscuration as to the actuality of relationship when it comes to those two things. And so rights and responsibilities, what I'm thinking is, and I had this thought today. I was in the holiest of places in my shower, between the shower and the toilet. Those are the two places I tend to have the most profound revelations. But I had a thought about responsibility arising, or our association of our responsibility with rights arising with a missing step in between an observation. That step is that so this is the thought that I had in the holy place. It was that, as an example, if I have a child, and one would assert that when one has a child, one has one has the right to have a child. You have the right to have a child, but you have the responsibility to take care of that child. What we really mean, if we really to inquire into that, is that when you have a child, the responsibility that we associate with the right to have a child isn't a direct relationship. It's actually an assertion that we make because of the child's condition being power, or powerlessness more properly. And so I think the relationship of rights and responsibilities isn't so much that, as it's more a question of and I don't even think it's really responsibility that arises with authority. I'm going to call it authority, power, authority, control, leadership, and you could go down the line, management and all that. But in the context of the analogy, one has a child, and in having that child, the child's condition is one of powerlessness. It's powerless to take care of itself. And so the assertion really comes in with in terms of the relationship of the assertion of rights and its relationship to responsibility really comes in relationship to the child's condition, which is powerlessness. And so the presence of power dynamics is what we are associating rights with. If you look, for instance, if we were to think, for instance, of your responsibility to a child, and that if that child were to come out, we, like as humans, we are a different in terms of the animal kingdom, so to speak, where you have animals that come out of the womb and are ready to go. They of course need some direction, they need some time sometimes to catch their legs. If you're thinking about things like horses and goats and that kind of thing, they need a little bit of time to catch their legs. You have for some reason in my mind, I don't know if I'm mistaken, but I don't even, why am I even going on that road of that? But anyway, there are some things that might have some developmental times. For some reason in my mind, chicken. I might be wrong, but in my mind, I'm seeing chicken needing a little bit of time to get their eyes in order, right? Chicken or birds, just generally speaking. And I'm feeling like I might actually be onto something, but that's why the world of information is out there to verify. But in any respect, the idea that I'm approaching is that if humans were to come out with much less need, much less of a power dynamic in the sense of the powerlessness of a child in comparison to an adult or anyone who is developed past that stage of being a baby, and past the stage of such such dependency, then there isn't or wouldn't, I'm speculating, be that same assertion of a responsibility to the child. So what I'm getting at is the notion of responsibility, and it interests me in the context of this question of mental health, and going back to the article and remembering that it spoke about families that are not equipped or are even fearful. Knock out for me, please. Well, we're past that point. I think we've long been past that point. So what is it? What I was saying, right? So families that are either or both ill-equipped in the sense of dealing with the mental health challenge of the individual within their family, or who are fearful of dealing with it, so they're ill-equipped in that respect, and understandably so. The thought that came to mind, and I think we had this association again of rights and responsibilities comes in for me, is thinking back in the 2010s, late 2010s, when I was speaking about crime, and I would do one or two talks, and the question always arises, how do we get them to stop? Because my talks weren't about stopping crime. My thoughts were about crime being a symptom, and us looking at ourselves as a society, us looking at the things that we accept as normal, as that we demonstrate our ideals actually. And so the basis of my talks, and consequently my response to the question, how do we get them to stop doing such and such, is, what are you going to change? What are we going to change? What are we going to do differently as a society? And that, I think, is the relationship that I'm pointing to, the responsibility of us in looking at ourselves. And so, let's see, when we speak about responsibility, and we speak about it in the context of rights, I'm attempting to, or suggesting, that perhaps it's not a question of rights where we're speaking about that, but it's a relationship to power that, or more properly responsibility has an association with power and power dynamics, and one such power dynamic is a child parent-child dynamic, which is why I brought up that example. Another such power dynamic is society and its members, governments and their members, all that. There's a clear power dynamic there. It's as with anything, it's a complicated relationship in reality, but in the context of mental health and persons being hospitalized, we can't trust society in a hospital. Um, one person as a member can't put a society in a hospital, and beyond the fact that society is a collection of members and blah blah blah. But if you get the point, if we think about law, we can establish law. We can establish law based on our cultural perspectives and all those other things, our collective views and those kind of things. And that is a power dynamic that dictates those who don't adhere to it find themselves in imprisonment and that sort of thing. So another thought that's floating around in my head in relationship to the relationships that we are seeing in our considerations, making relationships of like rights and responsibilities, is a question still yet to be answered, of perhaps earnestness being more related to power, authority, control, than responsibility. And again, all of these things, in the obligatory sense, is not the level of analysis that I like to discuss things at. But it's one that we can discuss, and it's one that we are discussing because we're making these associations. Earnestness, I think, I like the prospect of that because, at least in part, because earnestness implies competence in, and I think that's a big part of the question as well. Because even when we're speaking about family members and dealing with their our families and dealing with their members, we're speaking about the question of capacity, be it to deal with the mental health challenge, whatever is the trigger, whether it's environmental, and that could be in the family. Environmental could be outside the family, in society. Environmental, not just environmental, but it could also be physiological, having to do with brain chemistry and other issues. It can cross, and that's actually, I think, yes, that I think I know really what was boiling like the soon to be oats in me to speak about, is the cross-cutting, where, for instance, we spoke about the environment, we spoke about, we mentioned physiological, but we can also speak about how those two interact in the context of socializing, right? And so one of the interesting things, I actually need to go and look up that article. There's in the US right now, there is I think, what is it the CDC or some other institution of that sort, has spoken about there being an epidemic of loneliness. I'm not sure if it offered suggestions, but let's at least go into what suggestions usually are as pertains to things like loneliness. Now, you have a bout with loneliness, and you try to address that through relationship. That as a remedy is actually a gateway drug to more societal problems. And when I say more, I'm not even talking about more that haven't been experienced. I'm talking about more that I experienced, as in the one we're discussing right now. It's funny enough. Life is funny when you really look at it. So, we would look to relationship, look to a relationship of whatever sort. It could be, we're speaking about young men, at least the article did. It could be young men associating, young men, it could be young men liming, it could be at a bar, it could be on the block, it could be, um, in a private space. And, in the bar, there's going to be that alcohol drinking is going to be rounds. What did I say? The bar, um, the block, uh, and let's couple the block and the private space, and I'm talking about smoking. Um, and so these substances, they have implications, um, and for some people they'll actually face psychotic episodes as a cancer or mental health. They'll have mental health challenges of the physiological sense, the brain chemistry sense, as a consequence of things that they use. And there are different things people use, and there are different things people even do in a malicious sense. There are complications and implications for use of anything, right? And furthermore, for use of anything, even in the sense of smoke. It's barbecue smoke and the smoke of different sort of what you call them, trying to thing them together, trying to put weed and cigarettes together. um, I'm not sure if there's a term, or it doesn't come to mind, but just this, the putting it in that form, even incense, right? Anything, even incense, anything, it's not had a little situation there, it cut off. um, but it I'm here wondering if that was saved. Anyway, um, but so there are these implications, but then there's also maliciousness in terms of mixing things with things, and stuff like that. Um, and so there are these ways in which persons find themselves in these situations where they need to be hospitalized and that kind of thing, need psychiatric attention, not even just necessarily psychological. Uh, but as I was saying, the actual remedy that's offered, even at the highest levels uh, of mental health, sometimes I'm not speaking about the specifics of a mental health treatment context, because there would be the specifics of it's a one-on-one thing, and so there would be the attention to the person's particular needs, and of course there are different things in terms of short, medium, and long term, and so there would be a short-term remedy might be getting rid of some anxiety or some loneliness in these forms, but um, ideally you would also look to the longer term, in terms of facing, confronting the the difficulty of being with oneself, just being alone. However, the whole of society is oriented in that sort of way. It's oriented to escape. Escapism is the rule in society, right? And we escape into social settings. We escape into friendships. We escape into relationships. We escape into families. And so when we speak about an epidemic, and it's not just in the U.S. either. I actually saw something from an Indian news source that spoke about there being some sort of study done, where the whole world is speaking about having this challenge of uh, mental health. I think it's like negative emotion, like depression and loneliness and that kind of thing. These are things that we have to deal with within ourselves. These are things that all of our institutions would ideally deal with. Our education would make sense being educated in every respect in terms of the one thing that we're going to have until the end of life, which is our body. How to take care of it, physically, naturally, duh, but also emotionally, mentally. Those things would make sense. It would make sense if our family institutions were oriented in that sort of fashion as well, and the more I speak, the more complicated it can really get, because the rule in families and the rule in society and all its institutions is very much the opposite if we really look at it, right? And so, without going into to the depths of all of that, uh, let's see if we could pull it back to earnestness. So earnestness would refer in a limited definitional sense of being honest, and not just honest in the sense of a will, and honest in the sense of being honest with oneself, but it would be also being honest in one's behavior. Uh, it would involve then, especially if we are speaking in the context of leadership, and that is in any power dynamic, including the example that I gave of a parent-child relationship. At some point, we have to start. If let me put it this way, because we don't have to do anything, as is apparent, but our is let me yeah, so let's bring it back to that even the context I used to speak about things in, of what will we do, how did we get here? We want people to stop doing certain things. How did we get here with them doing certain things? We want not to have mental health challenges in our family, in our social circles, in our society. How did we get here? These conversations have to be so much. There's so much nuance in them. There is so much to be said, so much to be understood, that it's easy to hear judgment, and in fact there is judgment, because there need be judgment, because that's the mature approach to things. You would judge yourself, which is going back to that earnestness thing, earnestness and honesty. I speak about humility. I speak about that in by my definition, intellectual honesty, being honest with yourself. And like I said, earnestness is the mobility of that, the movement in that way. And so it's being honest about how we get here. And the reality is, I even spoke about family and these things being run into. We run into the social context, our environments. We run into relationship, and it's the running into these things that end up in abusive relationships, and it's the running into these things that end in the divorce rates that we have worldwide. It's the running. Well, these are my speculations. I don't have statistics, but it seems intuitive that if our prescriptions, be it from professionals, and again, professionals in the context of generalized ascriptions, not in the context of a intimate mental health consultancy setting. If our prescriptions are escapism, then we will find the problem ain't going nowhere. He coming back and gonna bite you somewhere, some point in time, and you might not be you. That's the interesting thing, because when elders or even professionals are proposing escapism as a solution, it's because this is the culture. And culture isn't created by the people that are living in it. They aren't the primary creator of it, right? Because they are, culture evolves, of course, and so they'll influence it, and things will change. But they meet certain things, and everything is just a iteration and permutation of something. Anyway, there's a starting point, so to speak. Probably we should say there's no starting point, because it's just a constantly evolving thing. And so when those prescriptions are made not just again in the context of it's because there is always value in anything really, and so there is value in that, in the idea of we have this whole better together thing, um, but it's interesting because to me the question doesn't even come. It does of course come down to when professionals speak, they would have those in their pocket as well. And again, I don't even remember what the extent of what might have been said in a prescriptive sense in what it is I would have read, but the beyond professionals, just elders, the spiritual aspect as well, those who are carrying that mantle. Even when we think about, and I'm thinking even just more generally about American media in the and in the religious context, Western spirituality and its egocentric focus, the and it's not even, well, that's actually like why I like the word egocentric, because it's not, because we can say self-centered, but then we'll have to speak about what the self is and what self is, and we can say capital S, we can say a small s, and the small s being the ego. So I'm happy I use the word ego, this ego-centeredness. And so while what was I saying? And so while if we were to look at the capital S, this the self in the existential, the most high sense, the deepest spiritual sense, then we would look at aloneness and our difficulty with it in a different way. We would look at it and recognize, well, not recognize, let's see, kind of distracted now, pull myself back. Competence, insert that word, competence, I used it before. Being competent with dealing with such a thing as being alone, being in solitude, finding solitude, creating solitude, making peace. What is the ultimate competence? What is God's competence, right? And if we delve into that question, I'm not sure if we will. I'm still a little bit distracted, but if we make working through the difficulty of being alone a priority, making peace, if we work on our relationship with, I don't think it's necessary to make things. I don't think it's necessary to invite or allow for the environment of division that comes when we speak about things like spirituality, and unfortunately we more so speak about religion. But even the intellectual process itself, for me, the intellectual process is analogous to the spiritual process. It's really all one thing, being humble, of which I spoke, having humility, all of that is really all one thing. We're the ones who divide up these things, unfortunately, and improperly, as with rights and responsibilities, right? If we contend, it's wise, is it not? If nothing else, let's not speak about the right and wrong of it, if there's such a thing, but it's wise to contend with something you find difficult, especially something that you can make every effort to not have it be the case. But even when we're speaking about the mental health situation, if you find yourself in a mental health a hospital, let's say, you find yourself in, like they mentioned, a strong room, and you find yourself in that situation, then you're alone, and then you really gotta deal with that, right? And so it's actually wise if I need to appeal to wisdom, and if it's not enough to just look at the bigger picture, the spiritual pictures, let's say, then it's wise. And so, going back to the question that we asked about how we get people to stop doing things, going back to the question about, going back to the concern about the things that are happening in society, and um, the, the the predicament we apparently find ourselves in with this mental health concern, and not even a concern, it's an issue, because it's something that's happening. It's not even a future concern. Then we can my invitation is the same. My invitation is to ask ourselves, be intellectually honest, ask ourselves, how did we get here? um, I'm actually playing with the framing of things, in the sense of humility helps. How Here's how. Asking the question, how can humility help? And making the assumption that humility can help, and looking then. And humility again is intellectual honesty. That's what I'm speaking about. And so it then begs the question, what is happening in my family that has this situation happening? What is happening in this society that's creating these sorts of situations? I don't think I addressed, but it is important to do so. The fact, in terms of the language that we use about choice and all that, that individuals are individuals, and they have their they make their choices, right? So my assertion, even in the context of crime, that we ask ourselves about what it is we can change, it's not intended to suggest that persons aren't quote unquote responsible for their choices. Choice is a whole other story. uh, but it is recognizing, uh, it's, well, actually, that's earnestness, in the sense of that's humility in action. um, because we tend, and I think this is a really good way to tie those two things together, we tend to look outward at what we can control, and not inward at what we can control. We try to deal with, we don't deal with the innermost gates, and the innermost gate is always the most important gate, because everything outside can change, and then everything does change, and you still looking around, feeling the way that you felt, looking for something else to change. And so we can look outside and say how we can get people to stop doing certain things in the context of crime and violence. We can try to figure out, what's happening, with this drugs thing, and stuff like that. But aren't we inviting it? Aren't we inviting it in this idea of, socializing as a remedy um, for our incompetence in the context of solitude? And this goes much further um, when we speak about uh, the dynamics of family, the the way that we reward ourselves within these relationships. Well, yeah, I got cut off again. um, so let's see if we can finish this. The way that we you see, what are families? Families are composed of members, right? They're members in the family. Members are individuals. The individuals, they have their own peculiarities, their own difficulties. If we, as I proposed, or as I speculated, if we run into, again, social settings, we run into friendships, we run into partnerships, we run into marriages, we run into to all these different things, then the 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 output of that, the family that we create, well, the output of that, one of the examples I gave is divorce. Trying to point to the relationship of escapism and the consequence of things that we are seeing worldwide. Um, and of course, there's family, right? The family that we create, not the family that we came from, but there's family that we create. And if you ran um, into any relationship incompetent, and I use that as well, abuse, um, in as arising out of this culture of escapism, right? And it's not just the behaviors of the individuals who are perpetuating the abuse, but it's also the fact of running in where sometimes, we talk about red flags, and we might run straight through those flags because we're so desperate to get away from ourselves. And even in the relationship where we are ourselves, which is the point that I'm making. The point is that we create a family, and we are in that family who we were before, especially if we aren't intent at any point on dealing with the difficulty that um, that presents itself. And we furthermore teach this. And it's interesting, and I look to my even my own experience of attempting to contend with the difficulties that I note in my own life, recognize my own incompetence, and try to deal with it. Some of it I might have asked questions, and you go around the world in a figurative sense, looking everywhere to find some insights, and you get frustrated, you get thwarted, you get opposition, um, even active opposition and that kind of thing. And so the incompetence is pervasive, because even when, you know, fight or flight we speak about, and the fight aspect, nobody's going to flee forever. So the fight aspect comes especially in one who hasn't done much fighting, let's say. Well, I mean, everything goes both ways, right? The more competent you are at it, and um, we speak in the mental and emotional sense. The more competent you are at it, the more willing you are to face it. But even a person who hasn't really faced anything, um, there might be some reservation, but there'll also be some courage, especially when you are unaware of how challenging something might be. And so, when there's that freshness of a newborn, a freshness of a new individual, another individual trying to meet the world and ask questions and try to address whatever they observe that needs addressing, as is natural, and to have that be met with um, met with unnecessary difficulty, uh, and in sometimes even the sense of what might seem to be help, or what might even actually be thought to be help, notwithstanding manipulation. That's a whole other subject. But we ourselves is what I'm getting at, in not dealing with um, our own shortcomings, wind up becoming obstacles, becoming frustrators, becoming thwarters of evolution of competence, really, of others. And there's this, again, all sorts of things can be spoken about, because there ought to be a relationship of mutual learning between a parent and a child, between a society and its members, between a teacher and a student, between a government and its people. All these things are supposed to be two-way communication streams, but we 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 become that. We become obstacles. We become and we maintain, and then we ask questions like, how do we get them to stop? It's interesting. I'll throw this out, that we sometimes persons ask, like I've been asked, um, in the context of a family, right? So we're speaking about close relationship. Why you? When I've picked up certain things that I've taken issue with certain things, and really in the same context that I was just discussing about recognizing certain things, certain incompetencies of my own, recognizing it being societal even, and trying to communicate and engage on that level. Why you? You know, and it's interesting when you think about it, because isn't the answer why you? Isn't the answer to the question why you because you didn't? If you had attended to these things, if you had asked these questions, if you had spent your life, and not just an individual, but if society spends its time concerned with I'm now thinking of as the quality of life, not the standard of living, not the technological advancements and all that, but the quality of life in terms of relationship, something that is intangible, you elevating yourself, you becoming a better person, and as a consequence, even the things that you think of developing, technologically speaking, will be will come from a different place, right? Um, and so the the question, how why you? It's because you didn't, and so the um, it's the same thing in the sort of example that I was given before, that these things could be that they are, or these things. I'm a little distracted again. These things, these difficulties we face are. I think I was speaking about, you know, what was it? We can escape. We can try to escape as much as we want, but it's going to come back. And these are the ways that it has come back. And really, there's no whole book you need to read or anything like that. And there's no whole spiritual insight that you need. You just start with humility. That's really the beginning of it. That's the spiritual and philosophical and intellectual starting point. All of it intersects in humility. And so just have that humility. And by humility, again, I'm speaking about being intellectually honest. Be honest with yourself. And that doesn't mean, I'm not, what's it, advocating for, or certainly not even presenting myself as the most honest or the most anything, frankly, which is why my whole life has been oriented around being moving into the sorts of realities that I've spoken about. But intellectual honesty, by it I don't mean walking around and being the most honest person. You live your life and you contend with what it is you choose how to live it. But when I say intellectual honesty, I'm talking about the honesty that's in you, in dealing with your own awareness. And so even the difference between intellect in humility and humility in the sense of a way that's behaved, an appearance, a behavior, a way of life, a way of behaving and interacting with people. You might not be humble in a particular moment, or even in your walk, if that's how you want to live, but you can be intellectually honest about it. You can go home and say, even though I didn't behave, I didn't behave humble in this moment, in this interaction. You think things over, and in doing so, you are being intellectually honest, and that's what I'm talking about. That starting point, and then, like I said, earnestness. When you actually put that into action, then we'll see what can be done. Um, if there's anything that can be done in the less invasive sense, less invasive as compared to, for instance, well, naturally imprisonment or hospitalization, which amounts to something equally negative in terms of experience, but also medication, which is like seriously invasive because that actually enters into the body, and so um, unfortunate the implications of medications of any kind. Of course, if something is necessary, it's necessary, but um, the actual necessity of it is undesirable anyway to begin with. So that is, I think, um, and it's I think it's a wonderful thing. I think it's a wonderful fact, a wonderful situation to find that the answer for crime and violence and deviance and dysfunction and mental health are all the same thing. Just be intellectually honest. That's and apply that in your life. It's each doing their very best, or the best that they'll allow themselves, in an intellectually honest sense, and then even in the context of policies and people involved in production of things like medication and treatments and methods, all those things, being intellectually honest with those two yield the same thing. It's really simple in that way. It's not easy, of course, because there are things you have to contend with. I'm talking about not escaping, right, or not using that as a primary or only method, but humility, intellectual honesty, um, that seems to be uh, an option.